folks, my name's Philip, this is Turtle Studios, and what's up with these cheap guitars, man? That's at least the question I've kind of been asking myself recently. These are two guitars from a brand called Gear It. I'll put one down here, which admittedly is a brand I hadn't heard too much about until recently. I don't know if I saw these first on like an Amazon sponsored post, or maybe it was like a TikTok shop ad, something like that. But it's another affordable guitar brand that popped up. You know, these are the $120, $150, starter guitar range. It comes with a gig bag, a little practice amp, your picks, your strings, all that sort of stuff. And basically I had the opportunity to get a couple of these and figured I'd pick them up and check them out. So I've already done a video with this one, or a couple videos now, and I have a couple more lined up. I did an initial unboxing and kind of impressions. If you're curious about that, you can go check out this video. And I've done quite a few upgrades to it, actually. It's a pretty cool player now. I've replaced some things like the bridge and the tuners and the nut, so it's tuning stable and it sounds pretty good. Like I mentioned in that original video, something I didn't really have an issue with out of the box with this guitar were the pickups. In fact, I'm using the stock pickups in this guitar over a set of Mexican-made Fender Stratocaster pickups, which I have laying around from when I upgraded that guitar a while back. That's a whole nother video I need to make that I've been putting off. But yeah, I think these sound pretty good. And there's a couple similarities I've seen across both of these guitars now that I think are pretty impressive. Things like the fret ends on both these guitars are rounded off pretty nicely. They have these ball end fret ends, which is something you've seen manufacturers start doing. I think ERT was the first kind of major budget brand to do that. These aren't stainless steel or anything fancy, but they're still really nice and really comfortable. And on guitars of this price point especially, that's very important. You have to understand they're probably making these guitars in pretty large quantities. They're of course making them overseas, so the wood that they're using probably isn't completely dried out, and by the time it sits on a ship or in a warehouse and gets to you, odds are that the neck will have shrunk. So wood, as it dries out, will shrink. The metal frets, of course, will not. That's how you get this phenomenon called fret sprout, where the metal ends of the frets, hold their shape and the neck shrinks. And so it'll just get kind of sharp and uncomfortable to play. That's significantly less likely with these guitars because they roll off the frets like this. So that's actually a super awesome feature to see in a beginner style guitar. There's some other things I've noticed on these guitars too. I mentioned it in one review and it's kind of a minor thing, but the input jacks or the output jacks on both guitars are flush with the body, flush with the plate, which is an interesting thing. It doesn't really make any difference in terms of playability or sound, but it shows that it's done correctly. You can go pick up a Squier or an Epiphone at the Guitar Center and, you'll see extra threads exposed, and it's just, it feels cheap. It just differentiates, a cheaper guitar from a more expensive guitar. So both of these instruments have, just subtle little touches up and down the instruments that show that there's some care going into them, or at least the manufacturer who's making these is taking notes from other manufacturers and, dialing in all these little parts of the process, which is pretty cool. Of course, both these guitars have tuning issues out of the box. The Strat, of course, much more. The Strat, by the way, is called their Canyon series, and I believe this single cut Les Paul is called their Valley series, which is kind of a cool naming convention. I don't know why I'm mentioning that, but I just thought that was cool. But anyways, both of these, of course, have tuning issues. The nuts definitely are suspect. They're made of plastic. Like I said, I replaced the nut on that Strat style. I will be replacing the nut on the single cut style. This has less tuning issues, mainly because it's a fixed bridge. The tremolo bridge that came on the Strat, of course, isn't really super usable in its stock form. The tuners on this single cut were actually pretty decent. I had no issues with them, where the tuners that came on the Strat were a little more iffy. They had a little bit more play to them. But yeah, fretwork is good. Both of these have coil splits. I think it's the volume knob on this guitar. And both of them, I think the pickups sound pretty decent. They're not going to blow you out of the water. They're not boutique pickups, but they're all right. They're better than, other cheap guitars that I've seen. The paint jobs on both of them, the finish has been pretty good. The Strat, well, it's not my style of finish looks great, and this single cut I think looks awesome. It's got sort of this matte ice blue finish that I think looks really appealing and really nice. And then just some other little hardware pieces like the saddle part of the bridge here. It's not the most expensive one, but it's by no means the cheapest one. I've seen a similar single cut guitar like this from Donner that had a bridge like this that had just these razor thin saddle pieces that I just have to imagine would contribute to string breakage later on. So this is a more substantial piece of metal, at least, that they install on this guitar. And yeah, even going as far as the way the strings are wrapped around the tuning post, there's no pokey ends coming out. You're not going to snag something or poke your hand on this. So there's really some care going into these, making sure they're appealing for beginners. And that really got me thinking, who are these guitars for exactly? This sort of price point of instrument is particularly difficult for me to think of recommending to a beginner, because you have to understand, with a guitar like this, part of what makes the price point go so low is one of the first things they're going to cut is going to be quality assurance. So there's a pretty high chance that a guitar you get is going to have totally different issues than a guitar that someone else might get. All of these guitars are going to need setups out of the box. They're going to need tweaks. They might have little problems you're going to have to fix. And if you're truly a beginner, that's not going to be something you're going to want to do yourself. And that's not really going to be something you're comfortable doing yourself. And so getting a cheap instrument like this is especially difficult unless you're getting it from somewhere like Amazon that has just like a stellar, easy return policy. So it almost makes sense for someone who's a beginner to kind of jump up just a little bit in the price point, where they're going to get something that's more name brand. That way it might hold its value if they wanted to resell, if they didn't end up learning the instrument, or they wanted to get repairs done, or whatever it is. It's just going to be a little bit more reputable. That being said, I'm a pretty avid supporter of these cheaper instruments because I think the value proposition really is there. I've been pretty vocal in the past, and I need to make a video sharing my experience about my Mexican-made Fender Strat back there. It's like a 2007, 2008 model, but that guitar has had all sorts of issues, and it was, a $500-$600 guitar when I got it. It's interesting to me, these cheaper guitars, but I think really who they're most appealing towards is people like myself, sort of intermediate hobbyist level players who know something about a setup, don't mind tinkering around with the instruments, like the process of upgrading parts and components and really customizing these instruments and making them your own. These are great options if you like to tinker with stuff or you're looking to learn how to tinker with stuff, which is a sentiment you've heard plenty of people say. And it's kind of become a cliche saying, if you want to learn setups, get a cheap guitar. But really, these are a great option because they're going to be excellent platforms to change pickups or components on. And at least in my experience with the two that I have, they're not going to have the more major issues like fretwork or things that, are actually going to require you to cut into the guitar, take away materials. So yeah, those are my thoughts, at least on these cheaper guitars. Personally, it's something I like. I find it interesting. I like finding out when new brands like this come about. I like experimenting with them and seeing what they're all about. Let me know in the comments what you think I should do with this one. I definitely am going to replace the nut. I like the color of it, but other than that, I don't know what else really needs to be done to it. Maybe some locking tuners. Of course, it needs a setup. The fretboard needs hydrated, all that good stuff. But what sort of creative stuff could I do with this guitar? Anyways, see you guys.